What happens when two of Hollywood's most polarizing figures clash on live television? What unfolds when years of simmering tensions between a former royal and an Academy Award winner explode into an all-out verbal warfare that leaves viewers absolutely stunned? You won't believe what transpired during last night's explosive episode of The View that had security rushing to the set and producers scrambling to cut to commercial. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle's carefully crafted public persona completely crumbles in front of millions of viewers. The atmosphere in the View studio was already charged with electricity, as Angelina Jolie, filling in as guest host for the week, sat poised behind the iconic curved desk. Her razor-sharp gaze swept across the studio audience, many of whom had specifically tuned in knowing that today's guest would be none other than Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex turned Hollywood aspirant. What none of them anticipated was witnessing one of the most brutal takedowns in daytime television history. Markle entered the studio with her trademark calculated confidence, her perfectly styled hair catching the studio lights as she waved to the audience with that practiced royal wave that had become her signature. She wore an expensive cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with delicate jewelry that sparkled under the harsh studio lighting. But seasoned observers could detect something different in her demeanor, a slight tension in her shoulders, a forced quality to her smile that suggested she knew this wouldn't be the softball interview she was accustomed to receiving from sympathetic media outlets. Jolie, meanwhile, sat with the stillness of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face, and she wore a simple black blazer that somehow managed to look both professional and intimidating. Those who knew Jolie's reputation as someone who didn't suffer fools gladly could sense that she had done her homework for this encounter. "Meghan, thank you for joining us today," Jolie began, her voice carrying that distinctive husky quality that had made her famous, but with an edge that immediately put everyone on high alert. "I have to say, it's fascinating to have someone here who has experienced both the pinnacle of royal privilege and the challenges of, shall we say, navigating public opinion in America." The audience stirred slightly, sensing the loaded nature of the comment. Markle's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for having me, Angelina. It's always wonderful to speak with someone who understands the complexities of public life and humanitarian work." The response was classic Markle, deflecting with grace, while subtly positioning herself as Jolie's equal in the humanitarian space. But Jolie wasn't buying it, and her slight smirk suggested she was just getting warmed up. "Yes, humanitarian work," Jolie repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "Speaking of which, I've been curious about your latest ventures. Your production company has been quite ambitious in its projects. Tell us about your upcoming documentary about women's empowerment. I understand it's been in development for quite some time now." The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, but anyone familiar with Hollywood politics knew that Jolie was probing a sensitive area. Markle's production company had been the subject of industry whispers, big announcements followed by delayed projects and rumors of difficult working relationships with crew members. "Well, we're very passionate about amplifying voices that haven't been heard," Markle replied, her hands gesturing in that rehearsed way she had perfected during her royal days. "The documentary is still in development because we want to make sure we're telling these stories authentically and responsibly." "Authentically?" Jolie mused, leaning back in her chair with a look that could freeze water. "That's interesting, because I've spoken to several women who were supposed to be featured in your project, and they've shared some concerning feedback about their experiences with your team." The studio went dead silent. This was clearly not the direction Markle had expected the conversation to take, and for the first time since sitting down, cracks began to show in her polished facade. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and she shifted in her seat. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Angelina, but I can assure you that we maintain the highest standards of professionalism in all our productions," Markle responded, but there was a new brittleness to her voice that hadn't been there moments before. Jolie leaned forward slightly, like a chess master who had just cornered her opponent's king. I'm referring to the women from the shelter in Los Angeles who claim they were promised their stories would be told with dignity, only to find out that your team was more interested in creating dramatic moments for better television ratings than actually helping them. One woman told me she felt exploited all over again. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Markle's carefully constructed image as a champion for the downtrodden was being systematically dismantled on live television, and she clearly hadn't been prepared for this level of scrutiny. Her media training was kicking in, but the panic was starting to show around the edges. That's simply not true, Markle shot back, her voice rising slightly. We have always prioritized the well-being and dignity of everyone we work with. If someone felt uncomfortable, we would have addressed it immediately. Would you? Jolie pressed, clearly relishing the moment. Because according to my sources, when these concerns were brought to your attention through your publicist, the response was essentially to minimize their complaints and suggest they were being ungrateful for the opportunity. The tension in the studio was now palpable, and camera operators were subtly adjusting their angles to capture every micro-expression on both women's faces. This was no longer an interview. It was becoming a public evisceration, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. Markle's media training was screaming at her to pivot, to deflect, to find safer ground, but Jolie wasn't giving her an inch of breathing room. The Oscar-winning actress had clearly done her research, and she was methodically destroying Markle's carefully constructed public persona piece by piece. Let me be very specific, Jolie continued, her voice now carrying the cold precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. Maria Santos, a survivor of domestic violence who trusted your team with her story. Ring any bells? She's been trying to reach your production company for months because the release forms she signed don't match what she was told verbally. She thought she was going to be an empowered voice in your documentary. Instead, she found out her story was being packaged as trauma porn. The color drained from Markle's face so quickly that even the studio makeup couldn't hide it. This wasn't vague industry gossip. This was specific, damning information that could only have come from someone with direct access to her production files. Her hands, which had been gesturing confidently just minutes earlier, now gripped the arms of her chair. That's not. We would never, Markle stammered, her polished facade cracking like ice under pressure. For the first time in years, she was truly speechless, and it was happening on live television in front of millions of viewers. Wouldn't you? Jolie pressed, sensing blood in the water. Because I have the text messages, Meghan. The ones between your assistant and Maria, where your team essentially told her that her complaints were jeopardizing the project for other women. They actually used the phrase, ungrateful, twice. The audience was completely silent now, watching this verbal demolition with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash. Some were pulling out their phones, undoubtedly already sharing clips on social media, with captions like, Angelina Jolie destroys Meghan Markle on live TV. Markle's breathing had become noticeably shallow, and a thin sheen of perspiration was beginning to show despite the heavy studio makeup. Her carefully modulated voice cracked as she attempted a response. Angelina, I don't know where you're getting this information, but it's clearly been distorted by someone with an agenda against me. An agenda? Jolie laughed, but there was no humor in it, just pure contempt. The only agenda here is calling out someone who has built a career on performing empathy while treating real victims like props in her personal branding exercise. The attack was so brutal and so precisely targeted that several audience members audibly gasped. This wasn't just professional criticism. This was character assassination, and Jolie was executing it with the skill of someone who had spent decades in an industry known for its ruthlessness. Markle's composure finally snapped completely. The practiced royal grace evaporated, replaced by raw fury. How fucking dare you? She snarled, her voice rising to a pitch that made the sound technicians wince. You sit there acting like some saint, but everyone in this industry knows exactly what you are. You're a manipulative bitch who destroyed your own family and now you want to come for mine? The studio erupted. Audience members were on their feet, some cheering, others looking shocked at the sudden explosion of profanity on daytime television. The other View hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue unfolding. But Jolie didn't even flinch. If anything, She looked satisfied, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. For Markle to drop her mask and reveal the person underneath all the carefully constructed philanthropy and royal mystique. "There she is," Jolie said softly, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The real Meghan Markle, not the humanitarian, not the Duchess, not the victim of unfair media treatment. Just someone who can't handle being held accountable for her actions." "Accountable?" Markle shrieked, completely beyond caring about cameras or audiences or the millions of people watching her meltdown in real time. "You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about how you alienated your own children, how you turned them against their father, because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention in your own fucking family." The personal attack on Jolie's children crossed a line that even the most drama-hungry viewers recognized as too far. But instead of the expected rage, Jolie's response was ice-cold calculation. "My children," she said with deadly quiet, "are not public commodities that I parade around for photo opportunities and Netflix deals. Unlike some people, I don't use my family as content for my next project." The implication was clear and devastating. Markle had built much of her post-royal brand around her role as a mother and her children's mixed-race heritage, often bringing them into public discussions about representation and equality. Jolie was suggesting that even this most sacred aspect of Markle's identity was performative. "You absolute cunt," Markle spat, her voice now completely unrecognizable from the measured tones she had walked in with. "You think you're better than everyone else because you won some awards and adopted some kids from Africa for your image rehabilitation?" The racism inherent in reducing Jolie's adoption of her children to a publicity stunt wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Several audience members began booing, and one of the other view hosts finally found her voice. "Okay, I think we need to take a breath here," she interjected, but both women ignored her completely. Jolie stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator preparing for the final strike. "You know what, Meghan? You're right about one thing. I am better than you. Because when I fuck up, I own it. I don't blame the media, I don't play the victim, and I sure as hell don't exploit vulnerable women to make myself look good while crying about how unfairly I'm treated." The words hit Markle like physical blows, and something inside her completely snapped. Years of carefully maintained composure, of playing the long game with her public image, of swallowing criticism and responding with grace, all of it disintegrated in an instant. She shot up from her chair so violently that it rolled backward, crashing into the backdrop behind her. "Exploit vulnerable women?" Markle screamed, her voice now completely unhinged. "This coming from someone who built her entire fucking career on playing damaged women in movies? You've been exploiting trauma for profit since day one, you hypocritical piece of shit." The studio audience was in complete chaos now. Some people were cheering, others were trying to leave, and security guards were positioning themselves around the set. The other view hosts sat frozen in horror, watching two of the most famous women in the world tear each other apart on live television. But Jolie wasn't done. She walked around the desk with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that the microphone still picked up perfectly. "The difference between you and me, darling, is that I never pretended my movies were documentary humanitarian work. I never looked victims in the eye and promised them empowerment while planning to profit from their pain." "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about," Markle snarled, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Everything I do is about helping people, about using my platform for good. Just because you're a bitter, washed-up has-been who can't stand seeing another woman succeed doesn't mean you get to succeed?" Jolie cut her off with a laugh that could have frozen hell itself. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've succeeded at exactly one thing: convincing people that victimhood is a brand. You've turned suffering into a commodity, and yourself into the CEO." The accusation was so precise, so cutting, that Markle actually staggered backward as if she'd been physically struck. Her perfectly applied makeup was now streaked with sweat and tears of rage, and her expensive blazer was wrinkled from her aggressive movements. "You know what?" Markle's voice cracked with fury and desperation. "Fuck this. Fuck you. And fuck everyone who thinks they can tear me down just because I had the audacity to stand up for myself and my family." She grabbed her purse from beside her chair But Jolie wasn't finished with her yet. Standing up for yourself? Is that what you call it when you throw your staff under the bus? When you blame everyone else for your failures? When you use your children's heritage as a shield against criticism? Don't you dare talk about my children. Markle whirled around, her eyes blazing with a fury that made several audience members actually step back. Don't you fucking dare. Then don't use them as props. Jolie shot back without missing a beat. Don't drag them into your publicity stunts and then act shocked when people call you out for it. The final insult was too much. Markle's composure didn't just crack, it exploded into 1,000 pieces. You're a goddamn monster, she screamed, her voice breaking with emotion. A bitter, jealous monster who can't stand that someone younger and more relevant is getting attention. Your 15 minutes ended years ago, and now you're just desperately clinging to relevance by attacking people who are actually making a difference. But Jolie remained unnaturally calm, which somehow made her next words even more devastating. Making a difference? Meghan, the only difference you've made is showing the world exactly how empty performative activism really island. You've taken real struggles, racism, mental health, women's rights, and turned them into content for your personal brand. You're not a humanitarian, you're not an advocate, and you're sure as hell not a victim. You're just a mediocre actress who married well and can't figure out what to do with the privilege it gave you. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath as the full weight of Jolie's character assassination settled over the studio. Markle stood there, trembling with rage and humiliation, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a broken whisper that the microphones barely caught. I'm done with this. I'm done with all of you. She turned toward the exit but paused and looked back at Jolie one final time. You think you've won something here? You think destroying me on television makes you some kind of hero? You're nothing but a bitter, vindictive bitch who peaked 20 years ago and can't handle that the world has moved on without you. And you, Jolie replied with surgical precision, are exactly what everyone always suspected you were. A narcissist who confused getting attention with making a difference. That was the final straw. Markle let out a sound that was part scream, part sob, and stormed toward the exit. But her dramatic departure wasn't quite finished. As she reached the edge of the set, she turned back one last time and shouted at the top of her lungs, "Fuck all of you! This is exactly why I left this toxic fucking industry in the first place." She ripped off her wireless microphone, threw it on the floor where it landed with a sharp crack, and stormed off the set. The sound of her heels clicking angrily against the floor echoed through the stunned studio until a door somewhere in the back slammed with enough force to rattle the cameras. The studio remained in shocked silence for what felt like an eternity. Jolie slowly returned to her seat, smoothed down her blazer, and looked directly into the camera with the composure of someone who had just discussed the weather rather than systematically destroyed another human being on live television. "Well," she said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I think that tells you everything you need to know about authentic advocacy versus performance art." The other View hosts sat in stunned silence, clearly unsure how to transition from what they had just witnessed back to normal daytime television. The audience was still buzzing with shocked whispers and nervous laughter, and somewhere in the control room, producers were undoubtedly having heart attacks as they calculated the FCC fines and public relations nightmare that was about to engulf them. But for Angelina Jolie, sitting calmly behind the desk as if nothing extraordinary had happened, this had been exactly what she intended. She had set out to expose what she saw as Markle's fraudulent public persona, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. The woman who had walked onto the set as the Duchess of Sussex, humanitarian and media darling, had just revealed herself to be someone entirely different, and America had watched every devastating second of her unraveling.